its passage now has been a part of that, LGBT equality, and ending violence against women. But here tonight, I am here to talk about the sixth of our core issues that doesn't get a lot of play or a lot of buzz in the media, and that's racial justice. So tonight, we come in solidarity with our N.O.W chapters in Minnesota who are doing all they can on the front lines for George Floyd and working to end automatic immunity for the police. I'm here in solidarity with our N.O.W chapters in Kentucky, working to eliminate the no-knock warrants that led to the murder of Breonna Taylor. And I'm here in solidarity with our N.O.W chapters in Georgia. Is Triana on the line? State president out of Georgia. She's on the front line right now, working on behalf of Ahmaud Arbery and his family to end citizens' arrest as well. And my message tonight is simple. Black women deserve better. We deserve better in our schools, in our institutions. We deserve better on our jobs. We deserve better in society. And I'm here with you in solidarity, and I just thank you for being here. A little bit later on tonight, I guess y'all don't want to get me to talking, because when I get into ACA 5, I'll get back to it. But thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Kolieka. I'm really excited you're here, so just thank you so much for agreeing to speak tonight. Okay, next up, Aidan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Aidan Hill. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm running for Berkeley mayor this upcoming 2020 election. I just want to acknowledge that where I am in Berkeley is indigenous land belonging to the Ohlone people, and I'm working towards stewarding their land and hopefully working to give them back access and rehabilitation of the landscape, especially now during the climate crisis. In 2019, I became the vice chair of the Berkeley Homeless Commission. Before that, I was a student at UC Berkeley, born and raised in Fontana, California. My alma mater is Riverside City College, where I got my associate's degree in communication studies. However, in 2016, I went to UC Berkeley. At the end of that year, so many things happened, from the death of Philando Castile to the Pulse nightclub massacre. All of that, including the free speech riots that happened with Milo Yiannopoulos, displaced me from UC Berkeley and helped me understand how people could lose housing in this area. I continued to fight for the rights of unhoused people in Berkeley and watched the passage of reasonable policies that continued to marginalize people, such as the 3x3 ordinance enacted by our mayor of Berkeley, as well as the continued attempt to destroy People's Park, which is a known sanctuary for Black people. Berkeleyans were not able to access their medications or shelters, and I saw elderly women forced to disassemble their tents and stuff themselves into 9 feet of spaces. I urged the city for more access to food and water in our community, and I did that by promoting a People's First Sanctuary encampment model through the Homeless Commission. I marched with Berkeley schools, including Berkeley School, Every Bee Needs a Hive rally, and I'm so proud of the youth that are committed to social justice. My initial goal when I came to Berkeley was to return to school. However, I had a $17,000 debt during the crisis of 2016 and 2017 when our president was elected, and I was unable to attend it. It took me a long time of public activism, community engagement, and making myself visible to the administration to actually get that debt removed. And luckily now I'm coming back to UC Berkeley in fall 2020. But that's not enough. I'm doing this for the memory of Nia Wilson, who was stabbed on a BART train, and it took the BART police more than a day to capture the offender, and that offender actually joined onto the BART train and felt safe enough to do so. I'm doing this for the memory of Kayla Moore, a Black trans woman that died in Berkeley due to police violence. She was tackled and wasn't responsive afterwards, and she was disabled. She needed better protection. But more importantly, I'm doing this for the future of Black youth in Berkeley. I'm lucky enough to have endorsements by Edith Boone, who is a muralist in South Berkeley, as well as she is the aunt of Eric Gardner, Cheryl Davila, who's the council member from District 2, as well as Veronica Fimbres, who is a veteran, a nurse, and was the first trans woman elected to public office in San Francisco. Right now, I believe we need a holistic response to the Berkeley's issues, including emergency preparedness, because we need to open our green spaces as temporary refuge areas. And this is so much more important for low income and poor people of color who may not be able to afford hotel rooms and housing vouchers. We have to include people in our democratic process, meaning we have to support neighborhood associations, increase board and commissioner input, and really focus on public transportation so people can encourage themselves in economics or politics overall. And I also encourage public health, which is why I'm very happy that you all are creating this forum to speak, because we need to respond with new and creative measures to stop the second spread of COVID-19, as well as other communicable diseases. And we need to ensure that we have personal protective equipment for all people. And so I hope in this meeting, I'll be able to talk about a few of those things, as well as reforming the police in Berkeley. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Aidan. It's a true honor to have you here. Okay, next up, Nikolaus, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Also, if folks can hear me.
I think you're muted, Nikolaus.
Oh, exactly. So yeah, if folks can hear me, give me like a thumbs up in the chat, or, you know, yeah, if you can hear my voice, clap once. I'm a first grade teacher, so I do this thing with engaging with folks. So that, yeah. Okay, awesome. So my name is Nicholas Knight. I tell people to call me Nick at Night, just so they can help to help them remember. I am a member of the leadership team of the Black Liberation Collective, otherwise known as BLC. We are a collective that consists of Black students who are dedicated to transforming institutions of higher education through unity, coalition building, direct action, and political education. I began working with them around the latter part of 2017, and they support students across this nation, but just across other nations as well, like international solidarity with Black students at campuses all over the world. We're dedicated to just supporting students, helping students to build power on their campuses, teaching workshops in political education. And I was going to, one thing that they did for me personally was when we, at North Carolina A&T is the school that I went to, we actually, we organized a campaign to go resist against the state when they drew gerrymandering lines, and we actually joined with another organization called Common Cause in order to sue the state of North Carolina. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, but essentially what they were doing was diluting the student vote, specifically the student Black vote, and we all organized together to ensure that those lines got redrawn and the folks that did it got held accountable. That's one of the few things that we did on our campuses. We've also done a lot of work around police divestment, community investment. Yeah, it's a lot of things, but yeah, I wanted to uplift before I ended my little introduction that one of the demands that BLC has in solidarity with the movement for Black Lives currently is the divest from local police departments and invest in alternative community responses for safety. So we are standing in solidarity with movements across the nation currently to defund the police as a means to abolition, not just reform. We stand with the organizers on the ground that are moving towards that direction. And yeah, so that's Black Liberation Collective. If you all want to look us up, you can type in Black Liberation Collective on Google just to see more information about our organization, our coalition.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Jennifer, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Jennifer Rojas. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I work with the ACLU of Southern California, based in Orange County. For folks that don't know, the ACLU is a civil rights and civil liberties organization. We cover Los Angeles down to the Inland Empire and Orange County. I work out of Orange County. I've worked at the ACLU for about 5 years now, mostly focused on local police accountability campaigns, but I've also focused on passing statewide laws around police accountability. So just to give a little quick recap, 2 years ago, we worked on a piece of legislation in California that now makes records of police misconduct available to the public. So that means, you know, for families who have lost a loved one to police violence, now they can find out how, you know, really how and if local police departments actually investigated the death of their loved one, and how that investigation, you know, what conclusions the investigation resulted in, whether officers were fired or whether they were promoted. So that was SB 1421. Happy to talk about that at a later time. And we also helped to pass AB 392 last year. That's a law in California that now creates a new higher standard that creates the boundaries by which police are allowed and not allowed to use deadly force. So beforehand, you know, and especially in California, we have some of the highest rates of police violence and state terror. And so some of these bills were aimed to reduce the rate of police violence in California. And so happy to talk about that at a later time, but definitely excited to be here tonight. You know, I see a lot of young folks, particularly in Orange County, leading this movement now to not only, you know, hold police accountable, but more importantly, to reduce the role of police in our lives, which is so important. So these movements to defund police and reinvest in, you know, community-centered social services as a means to get police out of the, you know, the occupations that they're not trained for. They're not, they're really not supposed to, you know, be serving in those circumstances. So yeah, excited to be here, and thanks so much for having me.
Of course, thank you, Jennifer. Okay, well, thank you all speakers for introducing yourselves and just being here again. For the few people who came in a little later, just a quick explanation. This is a very action-oriented session, so later we will be going over email templates and then having you send emails to your legislators, hopefully on the spot. So what we did earlier was we sent a link tree with all the resources that we are sharing with attendees, which contain email templates, talking points, demands, etc. So if you want to look through that right now, just to familiarize with it, it's right there in the chat, and then we'll go back through those documents later in this session to kind of dissect the more specifics of them. But yeah, thank you so much again. So I guess with that, let's go on to our first discussion question. Like I mentioned earlier, the purpose of this is for all of us gathered here to hear directly from organizers and activists such as yourselves, the speakers who just spoke. And we are here, especially as non-Black allies, to follow in your suit and just support these efforts already going on with all of our resources. But most importantly, we're here to listen. So with that, the first question that I want to ask the speakers is, while we'll be going over more specific policies on all levels of government later that we want to see called for, just broadly, you know, what changes are you working towards? What changes do we want to see in our environments, in our institutions, just in a general sense? What is the end we should be working towards here? Does anyone want to start? Go ahead, Aidan.
Well, to put it shortly, I think we should all be working towards equity. And that means people should have a living wage. People should have access to healthcare at all levels, including dentistry, mental health, as well as primary care. And we have to make sure that people have the freedom of environment. I think something that's happened in the last few weeks is we've lost sight of our fundamental human rights and freedoms, including freedom of privacy, freedom of nationality, and more importantly, there's been a lot of fear and a lot of provocation, especially at the national level, but even at the local level. And though we can't have a system of equity under those circumstances. And so I would say that we should all be achieving true equity. And that means people have to have access to housing, people have to have access to basic needs in general, and then people have to have access to the right to say what they need. We can't forget that the democratic process of just simply being able to speak and be heard needs to be protected as well. And I think that's essentially what we need right now.
Thank you for that. Does anyone want to pick up the baton and go next? Kolieka, why don't you go?
I would agree with Aidan. Equity, I don't want it to get lost in the discussion. Also, this is a global issue, so I would ask us to think globally, act locally. So that's one thing, and I would push for increased access to healthcare. We have supported Medicare for All and a number of bills. The entire Black Caucus agenda is great and is right on time in California. And obviously what I came to speak about tonight, ACA 5, removing the ban on affirmative action is definitely in time for COVID-19. So that's just a couple of things to add to the list that Aidan started. I mean, affordable housing, access to healthcare. I mean, we in California now, we talk a lot about taking into account the whole woman, and that would include the whole student and the whole child, and addressing each and every one of those needs. So we're pushing for access and equity. And then I want to go even further to say inclusion.
Thank you for that, Kolieka. Nicholas, I think I saw your hand up. Do you want to go next?
I think that just circling back that well, one of the core demands of BLC, the Black Liberation Collective, is to divest from prisons. I think that a lot of folks on the ground, a lot of organizers everywhere are pushing for this because we do believe that these funds can be spent better elsewhere. When we defund the police and we defund the carceral state, that we refund the community and we refund care for all people. So we want to cut ties with police. As far as our organization working with higher education institutions, we want our universities to cut ties with police departments. Whatever those contracts looks like, we want to invest in alternative community safety, invest in more mental health services, ensure that students and communities have access to adequate health care. And that's pretty much what we want to see as far as our ideas. We do believe that there's that there's access to a world that's better than what we have now, and that folks can have the things that they need. Their material support can be met. I didn't want to end without uplifting that in the UC system, there was a coalition called the African Black Coalition. And I did want to uplift the fact that there was a win there, where they were able to get the UC system to divest millions from prisons. And I know that Berkeley is a part of the UC system, so I wanted to uplift them as well. And also, something was triggered in my mind when the previous speaker was speaking about, acting locally but thinking globally. With our universities and our individual campuses, when we're thinking globally, we know that police brutality and the police state is an issue here, but we have to think globally in that, that these issues exist all over the planet. When we think about the genocide and the harm and violence that folks in Palestine are getting from the Israeli state. So we want to also have our universities divest from companies that are supporting that as well. So that's another demand that students have for our individual campuses, is that not only are we divesting from the prisons and the carceral state that causes us damage here, but also the carceral state that causes us damage in other places around the globe, like Brazil, like Israel, like Iran. So yeah, make sure that we're thinking globally around this, because global solidarity is another important piece of this thing that is going to ultimately get us free.
Well said, thank you. And then Jennifer, do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, I mean, well, I echo everything that folks have said. I think that's really on point, because I think we're also, you know, in this moment where not only are people paying attention to, you know, state violence against Black and Brown people, but, you know, people are also meaningfully talking about alternatives to police and alternatives to, you know, having police respond to mental health crises or to people experiencing homelessness. And so just echo what folks have already said. And one dimension too, I think as we are moving towards, you know, pressuring our decision makers, you know, at the local level or at the state level or national level, I think we also should be cognizant of the ways in which our decision makers are beholden to police associations, whether they are local police associations or statewide police associations. Really, so for example, you know, in Orange County, every single city, and it's like what it's likely in the city that you're in, the police department, those officers belong to an association. It's essentially a union, and so many of those associations bankroll our city council members, our state representatives, and I'm sure nationally, our national representatives as well. And so, you know, just to kind of speak on this a little, so in California, it's taken so long for us to be able to make, you know, important change, but change that should have happened years ago around the issue of police violence. And that's because our state legislators are all beholden to statewide police associations like PORAC, for example. And so I just think as we are working towards these goals, I think we should also be pushing our decision makers to take like a no cop money pledge. You know, I think all elected officials should be pledging to not receive money from these police associations. You know, the very folks that you know, that prevent officers from being meaningfully held accountable, from being prosecuted, you know, from being fired. I just think as we're working towards these really important alternatives, yeah, we should be looking towards this as well.
Raina, I just want to add that in Sacramento, they have started the Pledge to Reject, and I would request that everyone go to the website, and also some of my good friends that are now elected officials have already signed the pledge. I can send you a link to it, and to push your representatives to sign the pledge to accept no monies from police. So it's already a thing. It really should be ways in which we hold them accountable. So there is a pledge out there. Hold them to it, because Jennifer, a friend from 392, it's probably the only way to make them to say no, to break the link between police and our elected officials.
Aidan?
Yeah, all of what everyone said is great, but I think there needs to be something even more, and I hope our non-Black and Indigenous allies can help with it. It's really thinking about the shift of perception of what it means to have abolition, as well as how to really deconstruct why we have police. The modern police department, and everyone needs to know this, was based off of the idea of the slave trade, and actually extended from that, in which settlers would capture what they would consider barbaric natives, as well as Black people who they considered slaves. And they would put them in incarceration jails, and all those things would stop them from learning their language and their culture. We have to realize that anti-Blackness extends far beyond the reach of policing. We have to also look at how are we going to change this system that's based off of patriarchal and really domineering ideologies. We can jail killer cops all we want, but that's not going to change policing. Instead, it actually prosecutes people who need extra funding, need administrative leave, and it actually wastes more input from the community, more energy and economies. So we have to think about what are the challenges and what are the challenges and why do people think that police create public safety? And we have to think about, like, how do we actually reduce the tools and tactics and technologies that not only police, but private corporations use to target individuals, especially Black and brown people? And then how do we even reduce the scaling of the police? And that goes back to UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley contracts not only with UC Riot Police, they work with Berkeley City Police, but they also work with California Highway Patrol. And all of those influences go into our communities. And we can't ignore that right now, the National Guard is in so many states and jurisdictions right now. And they've actually shot rubber bullets onto civilians who are on their porches. All of those things are things that we have to take up. We have to understand why these are happening, and we have to really find a way forward.
Thank you, Aidan. So I just wanted to make a comment that California is very well represented in this call today, and the speakers as well. But the things that we'll be talking about today, we really did intend to make this a national call because a lot of the issues we'll be discussing have so much relevance, no matter where you live, not even just in the United States, but all over the world, which is why I'm appreciative that both you and Nikolaus brought up the whole concept of global change. There are so many things happening in the world right now that we should all be concerning ourselves with. And certainly just the idea of reconsidering what policing means anywhere is something that we all should be thinking about. So I think that's actually a very good transition point to the next discussion question, which is there has been a lot of talk about, reforming or not transforming what we think of as police and criminal justice in this country. And there have been calls for reform. If you all have seen the Campaign Zero stuff going around, the 8 Can't Wait things, versus abolition, which is defunding the police and just completely creating a new system of care. So I wanted to quickly discuss your thoughts on that, the whole concept of reform versus abolition. And Nikolaus, I know you have a lot of thoughts and experience with that, so why don't you kick it off?
Let me kick it off by saying that reform was born with the prison. I'm gonna say that one more time, that reform was born with prison, with the idea of prison. That reforms have been happening since the very inception of prisons and police. We've always called for reforms, and they've done nothing. Like, reforms have done nothing. We've seen in the past in history that they've done nothing but further legitimize and make more permanent these institutions, versus causing a transformative and transformative change that happens institutionally. So I think like a lot of what's been happening recently is the word abolition, the words, the idea of transformative justice. All of these things have begun to get co-opted by neoliberalism for the goal of again legitimizing these institutions. I think that when we call for defunding police and when we call for the abolition of police, what we're doing, and when I'm saying things like when we're saying things, when Black folks are saying things like invest into the community, what's happening is the demand is to divest from police and invest into the social conditions that cause us to believe that we need police. Because a lot of us, when we think of crime, we always think of it as an individual person that did a thing, versus a system. And I think that Aidan made some really good points in that we have to really sit with that. We really have to unpack that. Like, when we think of a criminal, like, what type of person comes to mind? Normally, it's not a white person, and normally it's not a rich person. We think there's a specific type of criminal that comes to mind, and we have to unpack the why behind that. So, like, instead of attacking the violence, the person that committed the harm, maybe start beginning with the fact that and this is a hard thing to sit with for a lot of folks, but that individuals are not solely responsible for the harm that they cause. That cultural conditions, societal conditions create these types and perpetuate these types of harm. And prisons and police do nothing but further perpetuate these types of harm. So when we think about abolition, we're thinking about wanting to end these cycles. Because we've seen it over and over again. Like Aidan was saying, if we send the cops to jail, we are legitimizing, legitimatizing, I don't know if I'm using the right word, but we're making more permanent and affirming the existence of these institutions that do nothing but cause harm to poor and working class people of color, specifically Black folks. So I think that reform sometimes ends up for us becoming this treadmill. If you were on the Sunday school today, I am using the words of Angela Davis, right? Of just running on this treadmill and being trapped within the same framework versus expanding our analysis in order for us to build a new world. You know, abolition is not just about what we tear down, it's also about what we build. So yeah, I encourage folks to definitely begin talking with other Black organizers, and then also, more importantly, begin like reading the works of radical Black organizers who have come before me. The things that I talk about mostly come from Black radical tradition, and Angela Davis is still with us, y'all. Someone who's lived through all of the civil rights movement, the Black Panther era. And she's written out things that have so much meaning and meat to it, and questions that are answered within these writings that you might not have thought of yet. So I would encourage folks to just check out some books. And I have some I'll drop in the chat. But Our Prisons Absolutely Obsolete. That's one by Angela Davis. I would encourage folks to check out. Also, I know that I'm talking to a lot of folks in California. And if you're not familiar already, Hello Black podcast is a podcast that's about like a lot of political education. If you listen to that, it's a guy named Delancey and another dude named Blake. And I know that they also have an organization called the People's Breakfast in Oakland. If you go check them out, I know that they have a lot of dialogue around this that answers a lot of questions that we may have. Yeah, so it's called Hella Black Podcast. If you look that up on Twitter, Hella Black Podcast, you'll find the @ names of both of them. And you should definitely check them out. And they are located in that area of California. Yeah, definitely. I think that we have to begin to envision a world that is not based off of our current conditions. James Baldwin said it best, is that the least that we can demand is the impossible. So I want to end on that, but yeah, like I'll just kick it off, but like kick it off. Reform was birthed with the prison. And knowing that if reforms have failed to have a transformative impact on jails and prisons, then does it make sense for us to simply call on more reforms?
Thank you so much for sharing. Do any of the other speakers want to piggyback off of that? If not, I mean,
Well,
I'll give
go
a.
ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Aidan. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to be very short. The reason why we need abolition instead of reform is that what they said, the idea of putting people into cages for simply the fact that they may be violent or may be vulnerable, it defeats the purpose when there isn't access to housing. Because you get people that actually intend to do crime in order to get free food, free shelter, as well as free water. We have to really deconstruct that. And I want to bring it to the present. We do have a national administration that is using the language of protesters being terrorists, being anti-fascist, or Antifa as they like to call them. And really what they mean is that anyone who has a socially left-leaning position is trying to dismantle the state. But we have to just realize that by using this language, what they're trying to assign us, who are Black Lives Matter activists, indigenous sovereignty activists, as well as social justice advocates, is that they want us to be jailed without bail. And they're using the language of terrorism to do that. But we have to realize that more so, not only are we American citizens, but we are humans, and we have a fundamental right to exist. And I think abolition does that, because abolitionists change institutions. They dismantle dictatorial and patriarchal structures and don't let them reassert themselves. People have to actively reject complicity and really name what's going on. And those who work in favor of the truth at whatever cost are the ones that we need to help us dismantle institutions that work to degrade our quality of life.
That was great, thank you. I think the other person who wanted to speak was Kolieka, right?
Well, I just wanted to keep it really short as well, because they have basically said it all, but reform won't bring about systemic change. When we really have to, as Black people are being murdered with impunity, we have to reimagine the entire role of police. It has to be much smaller, less influential, and not funded by the taxpayer. I think I'm most excited about the reinvestment in community, is why I'm for 100% for abolition. We have to really think about the role.
I don't know if anyone else is having this issue, but for me, you're cutting out a little, Kolieka.
Yeah, we couldn't hear.
It was designed. We have to reimagine also how we interact with each other. And I'm talking to you, allies. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear
No.
you.
Can you hear me? Oh, I'm so sorry. I think I cut out for a minute. So I was talking about when we talk about protect and serve, we have to think about who they're protecting and who they're serving. And this is a system of white supremacy. And the system is working as it was designed to. We have to reimagine
Cutting out a little again, I'm so sorry.
I'm working right now in Georgia to end citizens arrest. We have to reimagine that entire thing, and we also can't put any faith and see something, say something in our society until police see something and say something for each other and really break apart the thin, I guess you'd say, blue wall. So that is why I'm in favor of abolition. I'm most excited about the reinvestment in the community and breaking apart racist traditions from the beginning.
Thank you so much. Jennifer, do you have anything to add?
Just want to echo what folks have mentioned. I just think when we talk about, and maybe just to, I think, super highlight what folks have already said. I think when we talk about defunding the police, and when we talk about divesting from police departments and reinvesting in things like public health or housing to, resolve the issue of people not having homes, I think it's about trying to envision a more holistic view of what public safety means, and recognizing that police for Black and Brown people, for Native people, for so many communities, including folks experiencing mental health crises, for folks experiencing homelessness, police have never brought public safety for those communities, right? And so I think we're, again, in just such an incredible moment where folks are reimagining and sort of rethinking on what public safety truly means. And, that's why I'm so excited about the various defund movements and all these various cities and states. So yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah, all of those were incredible points. Thank you so much for sharing. And there's definitely a reason, a very valid reason why the vast majority of racial justice organizations who have been organizing in the wake of not only recent events, but for a long time, their work has centered around abolition over reform. So I think this is very indicative of just what these communities have deemed necessary, and I do feel it's our place to support that. So that's actually a very good transition again to our next section, which is we'll be going over the more specific calls to action and the demands that we've sourced from various organizations, but also discussing a lot of the calls for change that you four have just shared. So at this point, I know a few people have just been wandering in, so I'm going to reshare the link tree again, and that link tree is linktree that contains links to all of the resources that we'll be using to start formulating emails so that we can start contacting our legislators. Because again, at this point, we hopefully want to be guiding all the attendees here into getting some action in. So if you click that link tree, and there should be a document that says demands, and then another document that says email templates. So I'm going to start sharing my screen if I can. Yes, I can. Okay, so quickly just going over these resource documents because they are incredibly long, but just dissecting them a little. So this email templates document, this is kind of the skeleton that we made for you all to start formulating your personalized emails. And the reason why it is rather bare, or it doesn't have as much text as you might see another email template going around that would have you, copy and paste, is because we really want to, by the end of this meeting, empower you all to create your personalized emails, because as we've seen again and again, straight from representatives' mouths, I think AOC the other day came out, on her Instagram story and said, yeah, as representatives, we don't read emails if they're just copy and pasting into the same thing. So that's why this is more of an email skeleton, but we have created, to the best of our abilities, resources for you to fill in this skeleton very easily. So if you scroll a little bit more down from the first page, which is just the email template, you'll see that we have very, very long arguments and talking points for a lot of the issues that we have just been discussing. So defunding the police is a central issue that I think a lot of racial justice organizations have been calling for, so we're really putting a lot of importance on that, hence why it's the first point. So you have a lot of facts and statistics that you can use in your emails to craft an argument to call for your city council to defund the police force, or your board of supervisors for your county to defund the sheriff's department or something like that. And then if you just keep scrolling down, I'm not going to go over all of these with quite so much specificity, but there's also arguments for limiting the use of force, holding police accountable. Qualified immunity is a huge issue that has been resurfacing in the wake of recent events because it is such a massive loophole that lets a lot of bad cops who have committed really terrible things get off the hook. So that is something that we should be calling for as well. And then if you scroll down, these are general talking points, but there are also talking points for specific things that we can call for on our college campuses as well, which we will get to later. We'll go through a discussion of the changes that we will see at both the local, state, and federal level. So if you look back on the email template, everything I just went through, the talking points, those would be roughly where you could insert, where it says argument 1 or argument 2. Those are your evidence, pieces of evidence and rhetorical arguments that you can use to back up your demands. But if you want to look at the demands document, that is where we have the full list of as many demands as we could have sourced from all the different racial justice sources. It's definitely not exhaustive. But these are just to give you an idea of things that you can call for, and you can see we broke it down by local, state, federal, and universities. So start looking through that, keeping in mind that per our discussion just a few minutes ago, defunding is the very most important thing. That's the first step that we can all take to start pushing for change at the local level. A very easy thing to do is to just send an email to your city council members saying we should reconsider the budget and start defunding the police. But if you've already sent that email, like I know many of you have, which is great, there are a lot more specific asks later here as well. So yeah, that was just a very brief overview of these specific tools. If you want to start pulling up an email draft and start crafting your email immediately, please feel free to do so. And actually send to the chat once you've sent an email so we can all like cheer you on. But with that, I do want to shift the focus back to our speakers and discuss with a little more detail the specific changes that we can call for on the local, state, federal, university level. So to start off, Jennifer, I know you have some things to say about the changes we can implement on the local level, so why don't you begin?
Sure. So I can talk really briefly on the local level, and I'm very excited to talk about the state level as well. But so if for folks in California, it should be mentioned that this year, a new law is now in effect that, again, it's called AB 392. And what the purpose of that law is to change and make stronger the standard for deadly use of force by police in our state. And so, you know, we've known that in California, we have some of the highest rates and numbers of police killings and police violence in our state. And so we were successful with many grassroots impacted family-led nonprofit organizations in passing AB 392 last year. It's going into effect this year. And that essentially means that now every single law enforcement agency in California must now update their force policies, their use of force policies to meet the new standard. However, so just to give a brief background, before this law was passed, the standard by which police officers could use deadly force was deemed whenever, whenever police found it to be reasonable. That standard was very weak. It gave no parameters. It basically continues to allow, law enforcement officers to get away with murder, right? And so we changed this law. Now it creates this new stronger standard by which police can only use deadly force when necessary to prevent against an imminent threat of death. Okay, so for folks who might be interested, and if folks who are researchers want to look into policy work alongside these burgeoning efforts to defund the police, there are simple ways that folks can assess their local use of force policies. Happy to get into the technicalities with folks offline for folks in California, but an easy way to look to see if your policy is in compliance and actually meeting the new state law is whether it includes the word necessary. So like folks have mentioned, I think it's an important point to raise that while these reforms have moved forward and while they have been largely unsuccessful in creating the change that we want to see, I think what we've seen, at least in California, is the fact that while we've passed these laws, it takes so much energy and effort to make sure that police are following the law. So, so I think, it just sort of raises the point to me, the importance of these defund movements. And, for folks who are looking to, create more policies and harm reduction strategies to make sure that local police are held accountable, looking at local use of force policies is a great strategy to achieve that. So.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Do any of the other speakers want to add something about what we should be calling for on the local level? Go ahead, Aidan.
Yeah, I mean, To defund the police at the local level means that we have to remove police from mental health crises on the street and mental health response. Just by transferring resources to appropriate professional mental health community outreach services can also reduce the funding of the police and provide a safer environment for people. We have to be able to conduct public hearings and enhance community safety. We have to severely cut our budgets, and especially in Berkeley, where police have over 40% of the general budget from 2020 to 2021. Those budgets should go into education, health, and infrastructure. All of these things need to happen, but we also have to recognize the deep racist histories, especially in California. In this area, the Ohlone land was really preserved for thousands of years before the Spanish government settled the missions here. And we have to recognize that with the University of California, Berkeley especially, the LeContes were Confederates who moved to California because of the Black leadership due to Reconstruction in the 1800s. This university, UC Berkeley, was funded primarily by Phoebe Hearst, whose son, William Hearst, actually did a misinformation campaign and is one of the people credited for bringing marijuana into the English language. This fueled racist attitudes towards Hispanic people, and even William Hearst ran articles about marijuana crazed Black people assaulting women and playing voodoo music. So we have to acknowledge that reefer madness started in Berkeley. And I think that's something that all people can take actions on, is learning our history, understanding the racism that's been enacted in our communities, and really working to demystify where these things came from, these ideas, these stereotypes, and really attribute them to the ones who caused this pain. Because I promise you, their names are still in our buildings. We're reminded of them every day. And until we recognize what they actually did and the quality of life they degraded for people of color, we can't do healing. And that's why so many people are taking down Confederate statues, because it's actually an insult to them every day.
Thank you for that. That's very, very important to recognize. So if no other speakers want to talk about changes on the local level, I do also want to highlight that a big thing that a lot of organizations and organizers have called for is also defunding the police, or pulling back police presence, completely eliminating it in our public schools, especially at the elementary, the pre-collegiate level. I hope I don't have to explain why that's necessary. There just shouldn't be a need for police in schools. That's just completely wrong. But yeah, there's a more exhaustive list of things that you can look into on the local level in the documents. One thing I would encourage as you send those emails and write them is to look at your city's budget, primarily how much of it comprises police funding. So yeah, thank you so much. With that, let's move on to state priorities. Kolieka, I know you have a lot to say with a very important piece of legislation, so I'm just going to hand it off to you now.
Okay, thank you so much. And I would encourage those who want to get involved in legislative advocacy to get in contact with us. You can always contact me at president@canow.org, and I know that Jennifer and the ACLU, they're also doing a lot of legislative advocacy and sponsoring a lot of great bills this year. And if you would like to do that type of work, we could always put you in contact with the Black Caucus and get you active in this. So ACA 5, which is which would repeal the ban on affirmative action in California, we're really coming off a win, just coming out of Assembly with 60 votes, support across the board. Democrats, some Republicans, and independents. It will be heard, just to give you a couple facts on the status, it will be heard Wednesday, June 17th. Go ahead and write that down in your calendars, in the Senate Labor Relations, and I believe that hearing will be at 9 a.m. So tell you a little bit about the bill. it's not going to come as a surprise to anybody here or anybody who's paying attention that Black people are in a state of emergency. And ACA 5 is needed and necessary. It's one of the bills that was green lighted because all legislation now has to be focused towards COVID-19. And this also would increase opportunities, which also will increase better health and everything around the COVID-19 crisis. COVID-19 has obviously brought about, it's really exposed many of the socioeconomic and pre-existing conditions in the Black community. Black activists have been saying this for years and decades around this action to bring back affirmative action as our community has lost millions in business. We've seen our admission rates, even to the University of California, drop considerably. We have been limited to lower paying roles and just limited options in the workforce. Black people are on the front lines during this crisis. We are essential, we matter, and we have to be centered in this discussion. So when we talk about tonight about mobilizing and standing up for Black lives, supporting ACA 5 and restoring affirmative action is very needed and necessary. It's one of the solutions to remove the barriers that have harmed and limited some of our potential. I have sent you guys a letter you can edit on your own. Those of you who are in organizations like period.org, some of the other local groups, local now groups and local action groups on campus can send in your own letters. You can edit them and really get involved in the process. I'd love to go over this with you and talk about how you can take action on this as this moves throughout the Senate now. And basically, actions speak louder than words. Restoring affirmative action is the next step, and it is COVID-19 related. And we need to bring this back in California for student access, employment opportunities, obviously higher education. It really, really affects all aspects of society. We're being denied the opportunity to get ahead. And really, this is what all of us are here for, right? To end discrimination.
Thank you, Kolieka. So while ACA 5 is a California bill, I think a lot of what will be discussed in our discussions of state policy, including what Jennifer will say after this, can serve as inspiration and maybe just something that folks from outside of California can start considering. In the case of affirmative action specifically, unfortunately, California is one of only 9 states in the country to ban affirmative action, but if you live in one of those other 8 states, Texas, Florida are some of them. I can't list all of them off the top of my head, obviously. Mobilizing around ACA 5 is not ACA 5. Bringing affirmative action back would be a worthy pursuit. But with that, Jennifer, do you want to talk a little bit about the stuff that you've been working on with ACLU?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to talk about this bill. And thank you so much, Kolieka, for talking about ACA 5. I think this bill that I'm about to talk more about is super related to to the conversation that I think folks have been carrying tonight around the need to defund the police, around the need to create alternative infrastructures to replace the institution of policing. This is really what this bill is all about. So it's AB 2054. It's authored by Assemblymember Kamlager. And essentially what AB 2054, which it's also known as the Crises Act, it essentially is going to create an infrastructure by which California can support, fund, and scale up alternatives to police response. So specifically, AB 2054 is going to create a pilot grant program by which non-police first responders can receive funding to actually respond to emergency situations. So specifically, looking towards community-based organizations, for example, to actually respond to people suffering from a mental health crisis, or people who need services because they're experiencing homelessness, or people who are navigating domestic violence in their house, or folks with substance use disorder. These are some of the emergency situations that AB 2054 is going to provide grant funding to enable these community-based responses to meaningfully respond to emergencies in California. So so for example, to give in California of an organization that would be funded through this through AB 2054 is Mental Health First. Mental Health First is a grassroots organization based in Sacramento. Perhaps folks in Northern California would be familiar. Mental Health First is essentially an entirely grassroots, all volunteer organization that was founded by Black activists, brown activists, and folks with nursing backgrounds and psychiatry backgrounds to actually they've created a hotline and an infrastructure by which families who are trying to support their loved one with a mental illness, they can, instead of calling the police, can call Mental Health First to come respond and try to meet the needs of that person experiencing a crisis. And so, yeah, AB 2054 is excellent. It's sponsored by a number of organizations, including ACLU, the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, the Anti-Police Terror Project, Berkeley Free Clinic, shout out Berkeley, East Bay Community Law Center, the Justice Teams Network, Oakland Power Project, Policy Link, Public Health Advocates, the Stop Coalition, which is a really excellent organization I would encourage folks to look up. The Stop Coalition is founded by and led by families who have lost a loved one to police violence, as well as Youth Justice Coalition. So I am going to add some things in the chat, and I also copied them into the resource document that folks had circulated around how you can support AB 2054. Right now, it is actually next week, it's going to be heard in the assembly floor. However, right now, we're trying to pressure the governor to not only pass AB 2054, but also allocate it with the needed funds so that we can actually create this grant program. So I'm gonna paste those links into the chat so folks can send an email to the governor. Also, if you're so compelled, make a call to the governor tomorrow, asking him to pass 2054. And I'm also gonna paste a social media toolkit so folks can send out a tweet, put it on social media to, hashtag 2054 so that we create more of a buzz around this, this really important bill that I think is just so pertinent in this time. So thanks everyone for letting me share all that.
Thank you so much. And just to wrap up, I guess, the discussion on state policy and something that might be applicable no matter what state you're in right now. Something I have seen going around is people calling for just a statewide freeze on increasing funding for separate police departments on the local level. So if that's something that you want to consider bringing up with your representative or something like that, that's also an option. But yeah, with that, let's move on to national level policies. So is there anyone from the speakers who wants to kickstart that discussion on what we should be calling for on the national level?
Yeah. What's going on, y'all? Nick at night. We on Black Liberation Collective, we do have a list of 3 national demands for our coalition of Black students across the diaspora. But I'm going to read the 3 demands because I only read the 3rd one. I'm going to mention the first 2. So the first one is that we demand at the minimum Black students and Black faculty to be reflected by the national percentage of Black folk in the state and the country. Number 2 is that we demand free tuition for Black and Indigenous students. And then number 3, ultimately, we demand a divestment from prisons and an investment in communities. Again, our organization, Coalition, is just a coalition of Black students across the nation in different universities. And what we do is coalition build across universities, across states, and even across nations. So again, like if you want to plug in, I will drop the link to the website, and also you can follow us on Instagram at Black Liberation Collective. But what we essentially do is we build power for Black students across campuses, so that that they can reach their own individual demands that's catered to their specific area and their material needs, and also uplift the demands of all of us nationally. And nationally, the other thing I think that needs to be talking about, and when we're thinking about divesting from prisons and police in the carceral state, again, acting locally but thinking globally, we should also be talking about decreasing military spending. I don't think that we can have a conversation around where our money can be better spent if we aren't talking about the outrageous amounts of money we're spending on the military and furthering American imperialism. The American empire has served to be nothing but evil to marginalized nations around the world, and that money can be better spent taking care of the folks here. So yeah, those are our 3 demands though, and I could also go more into that when we go in that other conversation. But yeah, as far as national, we do have national demands.
Thank you so much. Do any of the other speakers want to add anything?
I mean, nationally, it's really difficult at the federal level because of the systemic violence that's happening. Many Congress people have stated that they see war in the future, that our president stated when the looting starts, the shooting starts. And it's just so important that we recognize that these aren't just white areas that are being targeted. These are areas that are diverse, that have people of color, that have trans and gender non-conforming people. And we really do need to provide avenues in which they can escape the conditions which are perpetuating their poverty. And I don't think this is what the foreign or national government can do, but this is something that we can do to affect change at the national level, is really provide avenues and support people into welcoming cities, especially with Berkeley, because it's an international sanctuary city. It's so important to protect students, especially from other countries who do not have rights or access to resources that we as Californians benefit from.
Thank you for that, Aidan. And if you look on the resource documents, namely the demand sheet, there are a couple pieces of specific legislation listed as well. Some things that have been gaining traction, at least in the public debate, I think, is one piece of legislation that seeks to end qualified immunity. I think the co-sponsors are Ayanna Presley and another one whose name escapes me at the moment, but that's a good piece of legislation to look into. And then I think someone else mentioned in the chat earlier about the Department of Defense's fun little program that actually donates or sells military-grade equipment to local police departments, which is, just something we should not have. Police departments should not be militarized like that. So that's called the 1033 program from the Department of Defense. We can call on our legislators to put an end to that as well. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. With that, let's turn our focus to the change we can push for on our individual campuses. As was mentioned earlier, there are a lot of young people on this call tonight, which is really great to see. And I think that change can start even as small as, just our school environment. So Nikolaus, do you want to start?
Absolutely. So yeah, on our campuses, I did want to, again, I know I'm talking to a lot of folks in California, so I did want to again uplift the African Black Coalition that consists of Black students across universities in the UC system. So if you have not heard of them, definitely plug in. And yeah, when we're thinking about like campus changes at our specific institutions, we want to again definitely press divestment from the police departments, our local police departments, whatever contract that looks like for your university. You want to definitely we want to definitely press our universities to divest and ultimately end those contracts and invest in community and campus care. And beyond that, going back to that, like the thinking about globally, right? Like how are our institutions not only supporting the state sanctioned violence that happens within close quarters, but how are they also supporting international state sanctioned violence across the globe? So I know that at several campuses, we've had students, Black students, that have organized to press their campuses toward divesting from Sodexo. I'm going to name that one. I know that that's a food service that goes across a lot of universities. I know that it was at my university, but Sodexo is another one of those companies that benefits from prison labor, and they also have ties to the Israeli state. And we want to press our universities to divest. And like also there's a list of companies that do that exact same thing. So we want to actually press our universities to not only divest from the police state here, but also divest from the companies that we are putting our monies into. I think, and then also going into that just a little bit more, that like when we think about how do we do these things, one, again, making sure that we build these coalitions within with each other across universities, as well as making sure that you're power mapping like your university, knowing like who sits at what specific place to get the goal that you ultimately want. I know that at some universities, there's the board of trustees. I know that some universities, there's the chancellor's cabinet. We want to make sure that we target these people and demand the things that we deserve. And so, yeah. And also, I wanted to take it a little bit further, is that like students also don't need to not only center their efforts toward what happens on our campuses, right? Like we are students within a specific community. We're located within a community, and it's also important to not only advocate for ourselves as students on our campuses, but also for the community that we reside in as well. Like while we're there, that is our home, and quite frankly, we're occupying space in a home that doesn't belong to us. So also like thinking about how is our university supporting our our community and advocating for the community in which we're residing in.
That was really great, thank you. And then Aidan, I know you had some things to say about specifically the UCPD, which is the police force that services the UC system. But once again, like I've been saying, I would invite all of you, especially people who go to school outside of California, to consider the use of force on your college campuses. Don't limit it to just the UC system. I've heard it's pretty bad in many places. So.
Yeah, this is all premised under what the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists said, is that we have 100 seconds to midnight. We're now expressing how close the world is to catastrophe in seconds, not hours or minutes, and it's the closest to doomsday we've ever been in the history of the doomsday clock. And so the university has a specific responsibility because of these worsening factors, which include nuclear weaponry, climate change, and then cyber risks. The university was responsible for financing the cyclotron in the Manhattan Project that led to nuclear weapons, as well as developing the modern police force. And so the university has an especially responsibility to take police reform into their own hands. I believe that those 14 deadly force rifles that were given to university police needs to be taken out of their hands and disintegrated. I believe that we have to suspend paid administrative leaves for cops under investigation, as well as make individual police officers liable for misconduct, withhold their pensions, and have no hiring clauses for police who have used excessive force or who have a reputation of racist, segregationist, or white supremacist affiliations. We have to prioritize supportive public housing for displaced residents, and that leads to the climate crisis. You know, the unoccupied chancellor's mansion at UC Berkeley can help students, especially if there's an earthquake, if there's a fire, or if there's a flood. And so we have to pressure the university to take these changes as well. And also we have to move UC Berkeley police off campus and out of Sproul Hall. We have so many marginalized groups asking for space. And I'm not sure if too many people know this, but at UC Berkeley, the Black Student Union is in the back of the university, facing the police department in trailers. And I don't believe that's a form of equity for our student population. We also have to protect open spaces at all costs. And these open spaces are temporary refuge areas that especially students in dorms need to go to if there is a natural disaster. And lastly, we have to pressure the Tang Center, which is the public health center for UC Berkeley students, to give free testing, to have low-cost prescription drug prices. All of these things are resultants from diabetes, which is how mostly low-income poor people of color don't have access to nutrition, as well as mental health problems because of the discrimination people face throughout their lives. And lastly, I just want to mention that UC Berkeley is moving towards artificial intelligence, working with Microsoft to understand the impacts of cyber risks. But cyber risks and disinformation continue to promote negative biases and heightened climate threats, as well as undermining our global efforts to foster peace. And so the university has to, and I mean has to, divest from Homeland Security funding, as well as protect privacy as a human right by divesting from Palantir, which is ICE tracking software. And so those are the things I wanted to mention that the local schools can do. But until these reforms happen at this university or within universities across the world, we can't truly expect our public administrations to have the knowledge, the research, the development to actually empower militarization and empower mutual peace. And so that's why I wanted to mention at UC.
Thank you. Then I do want to mention that for a lot of college-related things, usually there are ongoing efforts already spearheaded by, for example, ESU or Black student associations or anything like that. So I do want to just put out there that as students, we should always be supporting those existing efforts going on and just making sure we're not co-opting. And yeah, before we move on, I'm so sorry, I forgot to mention earlier, but thank you Ashley for bringing it up in the chat. So this is, we do want to challenge you all to send emails. And the goal for tonight is 5 emails sent by everyone here. So you can address them to your local government, state, federal, even your college campus if you're a student, whatever. But honestly, just let's just uplift each other whenever we get something done. So if you manage to send an email, put it in the chat and then we'll cheer you on. Just thank you, all 4 of you, for that wonderful discussion of what we can do on different levels of power and institutions and things like that. If you look at the resource documents for all of you, there are more specific things listed as well. I have to give a shout out to my fellow organizers for working very hard to pull demands from a lot of separate college campuses as well, including campuses in New York, campuses in outside of state, and a lot of those things. So if you're a young person, feel free to look at those for inspiration on some efforts that you could potentially get involved with on your campus. But yeah, thank you so much. Before we move on, something else that I wanted to mention was that, we should be very, very grateful for these 4 wonderful speakers for spending their time here today. And I really want to make sure that they don't go uncompensated. So what I'm going to do is that there is going to be a minimum speaking rate that will be afforded to the speakers, but if y'all could help us out with donations to just make sure that these speakers get their due. I'll put my personal Venmo in here. I was planning to make a separate one just for this, and I didn't get around to it, but I promise I'm not going to embubble these funds. But all of these will go directly back to the speakers. But yeah, so I'm just going to put that up there, and if you feel compelled, please, donate whatever you can, just so we can support the speakers who are here. Yeah, thank you so much. And then, so our last discussion question before we move on to the Q&A is, I guess, just really short, what can we do after this meeting to continue activating? Oh, sorry, I need to pick someone to start first. Would anyone like to begin first?
I like what you said. So yeah, I wanted to clarify earlier when I was speaking about power mapping, I just made the assumption, should not have. But when I say power mapping, I'm talking about mapping out like the landscape of your campus. This applies across organizing, but just like power map the landscape of wherever you're organizing, between who has the power to get you to your goal, who does not, who is with you and who is not, just so that you're clear of the pieces that are existing in the landscape. So when I was saying target, I didn't want folks to get triggered about that word. That word was specifically about like who are the key stakeholders that are going to get me, that are going to get us ultimately to the goal that we are looking towards. So I like what you said. When you talked about like co-opting and starting with looking out for organizations that are already doing this work. That's super important, and building community with these people. Building community is like an immediate next step. And no matter where you are, whether you are on a campus or whether you're just in your neighborhood, that's like either talking to a fellow student or just talking to your next door neighbor. Like begin to build community with folks and to begin to identify you all's need and begin to build off of that, because we win with solidarity. So I think that's what I would say. Like from here, not only thinking about these broad things, these goals that we have in regard to policy change, like also like abolition, again, is not just about what we tear down, but it's also about the world that we build. So begin building these things, begin building within your mind, begin building relationships, because that's, and also begin to learn and unlearn and be willing to, as Mary Hook's coin, be willing to be transformed in the service of the work. For BLC, I did put the @name for, our organization's Instagram. I'll put my @name for Twitter if y'all want to follow me and stay connected. Let me know how I can support you, and vice versa. And yeah, that's about it for me. Thank you all again for having me on here. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time.
Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to chime in? Kolieka, did you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm unmuted. I just wanted to say again, thank you for having me. I stand inspired. The leadership on my alma mater's campus. I know that you guys are going to be all right because we are well represented here tonight. I wanted to just contribute a couple things to the campus discussion. Of just making success of Black students a campus-wide priority, and seeing any failure as a problem of the institution and not the student, and having a robust and aggressive core of counselors for students, particularly for students of color. So that's what I wanted to say in terms of that. I am full-time in legislative advocacy. And so, like I said, if anybody wants to connect or work through that lens, that's fine, but there's a lot you can do. There's so many groups on the ground. Indivisible has a great network of bird dogging, of postcards. There's so many things that you can do. also a lot with the younger generation now. Digital activism does have its place here to like, text, tweet, no justice, no peace. So I think that there's a lot of ways that we can participate and also to move these issues forward, even during the COVID-19 crisis, because that question has come up a lot, and how we continue the work while we're all at home. And so there's a ton of things that we can still do. Activists Rise, and I also want to give a shout out for building community and continue to work together, because we will not go back to the normal that we were used to. We're going to have to build something new. So now let's take the radical tradition and let's really build something new and equitable. So if you want to talk about legislation or anything else in that realm, you can get in contact with me. My email address is president@canow.org. I'll put as much as I can into the chat box as well. And I just wanted to thank you so much for allowing me to be here with you tonight, in solidarity with you all. And we are in this together. And I think that's about it for me.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, Jennifer unmuted first, so that's all right, Aidan.
Really quickly, I'm just going to repeat what other folks have said, just in terms of, you know, the importance, I think, of getting connected with an organization, whether it be grassroots, nonprofit, union, you know, just get connected with an organization with an explicit racial justice framework and set of goals, set of principles. I think that's really important. And yeah, just stay connected, build community. I love that. But yeah, thanks everyone so much.
Go ahead, Aidan.
Yeah, and once again, I reiterate what everyone said. It's so important to unlearn and relearn, because our educational systems from these last 400 years has really been moving towards one goal, which is profit. And the most profitable lives and those people who created the systems did not include people like you and me. And so we have to really turn that on its head. I encourage people, especially those who live in the Bay Area, to donate to the Segurite Land Trust, which is a women-led indigenous community land trust intended to give land back to the Ohlone peoples. And I want you to all feel encouraged that when you're mobilizing, the next step is to occupy. And that means occupy time, occupy spaces, and occupy people's attention. And by creating this platform of understanding the issues that are affecting life, you too can have the ability to occupy other people's, those empowers time and energy to make true reforms. And so I want to thank you again. You can follow me on social media at voteahill. You can also email me directly at aidan@hill.vote. And so I hope to hear from you, and I'm going to continue fighting. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time, but there were 2 questions asked earlier that if everyone is all right with, we could maybe have a short little Q&A. So the first one is, how do the panelists reconcile abolition with calls for the perpetrators of state violence to be held accountable within the criminal justice system? Should individual police officers be sent to jails/prisons for their crimes? If anyone wants to take a stab at that.
Yeah, I was actually, I saw that question and I thought it was like an amazing question. Cause that is a thing that, people think, and like, that's a thing that like, that's something that we deal with. That's something that we struggle with. And it's important again for us to struggle through these things. Angela Davis wrote a book called, Freedom is a Constant Struggle. So it is very important for us to begin discourse around these things. I was listening to her today and she actually addressed that question. And I think, like, to sum up what she said, she basically told us that, you know, we have to begin to think of more creative ways for accountability that doesn't just end with somebody in prison. Because the way she framed it was just throwing a cop into prison, into a place where carceral violence is a norm, is an easy way out, almost. And so how do we begin because even if they're in prison, they still have not actually reconciled with the amount of impact that the harm had actually done. And that's when we think about prisons themselves, that's not what they serve to do. They don't ever have the person who committed a harm to actually reconcile, and on their end, as well as like the person who was impacted, there's never any reconciliation for that, the family of those who were impacted. So we gotta also like begin to unlearn these things. When folks are calling for accountability, I think that a lot of it's just, you know, that's our first hunch. It's our first impulse, is that we want to do to them what they did to us. And again, that's where we have to begin. Like Aidan was saying, they were giving us really good things about unlearning and relearning. Like we have to begin to expand our framework and expand our analysis, so that we can begin to think of new ways that we can hold accountability and hold community, and actually hold what was really restorative justice and transformative justice. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Does anyone go ahead, Aidan?
Should police go to jail? No, it doesn't help. Instead, I encourage rehabilitation. So that means de-escalation of their own actions and their own intents. A lot of police suffer from PTSD as well. And so we have to maintain people's well-being as a whole. And isolation only encourages resentment and mistrust of the systems. And anyone who is going to jail, there's no trust when you take them away from their families, from their children, from their parents. And it really creates a wound that impacts the entire community. Cornel West, I think, said it best. The condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. And so that means that police who are using excessive force or even lethal force need to really confront and be open to confronting the survivors of the violence and the death. Because unless those people who are suffering have the right to feel heard, and not just only get that right because of a viral video, they really need to feel that truth and reconciliation is possible. And that includes reparations. That includes giving back to people for what they lost. It's not enough to say sorry when you took someone's mother and the rest of their life, they will have that on their consciousness. You actually have to begin rebuilding the structures that these acts of violence left people with.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything to add on that? If not, we can move on to the second question from the Q&A that I picked out.
I did have one thing. Yeah, just really quickly. So the example that was brought up today was there was a soldier that did committed a war crime against a family member, and I think killed a husband and a child. And when they were in court or whatever, the mother who was impacted, their first request was, their only request of the person, they said, I don't want them to go to jail. I want them to visit me every 2 weeks. What they said was, I want you to come visit me every 2 weeks so that I can give to you the love that I meant to give to that I wanted to give to my son for the rest of their lives. So you can feel that, like that's an example. And not saying that this is a monolithic thing, that every survivor is going to react in the same way or respond in the same way. It's just that these are different things that we can think about to expand our minds. And the other piece of it is that when folks commit a harm and they get thrown in the cage, there is no guarantee that folks are not going to recreate that harm in the cage to somebody else. So we also have to be cognizant of that. Like, how are we centering incarcerated folks who are locked up for nonviolent offenses in this conversation as well?
That was an amazing point. Thank you for that. Okay, well, if no one else wants to add anything, the second question we got was how can we change people's perspectives with respect to some police officers who are nice? For example, my friend's son is a sheriff, another friend who is a police officer. How can we distinguish between the system and individuals? We need to change the system. What is the best strategy so we can gain support? Does anyone want to try that?
I'm totally welcome to mention something, but I want to allow other speakers to give their thoughts.
Same.
All right, well, it's up to you, Kolieka and Jennifer.
Same. I can give over our time to if people have the thoughts or open it up to the audience. I just wanted to say quickly, I think we're past the changing hearts and minds. It's a very slow route, and I did want to speak to the brother Nicholas who was talking about the non-monolithic viewpoints of the Black community, and I did just want to give a shout out to the eloquent rage. That is within our community. Shout out to Brittany Cooper and her activism around that, that it is okay to be angry. It is okay that not all African Americans are for the thoughts and prayers, that it is okay to have that eloquent rage and want accountability in the form of punishment and as they interpret it as justice. And I just wanted to give speak a little bit to that eloquent rage.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, just wanted to add, I think perhaps to the question, I'm not sure if I'll hit it on the head, but I think, for the past, since the uprisings in Ferguson and, I think since, at least, I think for years, for at least over a decade, we've seen folks who have been impacted by police violence, folks who have lost a brother, son, or husband to police violence. There have been shifts in what folks are demanding to, the point where that we're at now, right? I think years ago, there had been requests for better training, for body cameras, for, tools and technologies and sort of, again, training that I think, and perhaps also like the, making police departments more diverse. I think we have seen, over the last 10 years, the ways in which those changes have not resulted in a decrease of the amount of people who have been killed by police. So, I just want to echo what Kolieka mentioned. Like, I think we're beyond trying to shift the hearts and minds of officers on the force, because at the end of the day, folks are part of this institution that is continually allowed to take human life without repercussions. And, there's an extreme power imbalance between folks who have been impacted by police violence and police departments, across our country. And so I just think it's important, I think, as family members to speak on the need for alternatives to police and the need for police accountability. And I also think it's incredibly important to, to really center those who are most impacted by police violence, particularly families who've lost a loved one to police violence, because, I think, even before the Black Lives Matter movement, have really pushed this conversation and have really created important and essential changes across our country. There were impacted families who were leading this work, and so I think those folks have really been on the front lines in terms of making these changes, and are continuing to be on the front lines to in this entire defund the police movement and beyond. So. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Aidan, do you want to go now?
Yeah. Here's another quote, and it's from Stokely Carmichael, who was well known at UC Berkeley. If a white man wants to lynch me, that's his problem. If he's got the power to lynch me, that's my problem.
That's my problem.
Mm-hmm. And we have to realize that police are here to protect private property and not personal safety. That's the fundamental role of police. And there's so many things that we can do. And I don't want to talk about the intentions of why people join the police or even join the military. I'm sure that many people are nice, and that is a personal character trait. But when we talk about the system of police brutality, violence, and injustice, we have to realize that the forces or even the ideologies behind policing right now is tactical espionage. It is using all black cars, using undercover cops. It's using sirens and lights that are meant to alarm and disengage people. And all of those things create a more hostile environment for people to be around police. And so I encourage police officers to wear yellow vests like construction workers, like police in the UK do. Why is it that police officers wear all black? And especially at night, they should be visible to the public. We can change the colors of the lights and sirens to yellow too, to show that there's a public health emergency or a hazard available. It doesn't need to be red and blue, which are alternate colors. We could stop low-level policing, and so people will feel less frustrated with how they're being impacted by police systems. And I mean, a good sheriff would encourage all of its police officers to not use lethal force ever, and to actually go towards firing any police officer that uses excessive force. And so those are the things I encourage. If there are good police officers, that they should be demanding this from their departments. They should be demanding the de-escalation of the funding given to their departments. And we have to encourage those of us to really stress that policing now in the 21st century is completely different. There's aerial footage through drones. There's wiretapping because of the Patriot Act. And that means police have an even bigger, a larger responsibility to ensure the public trust and maintain the benefits that we all encourage, which is freedom of movement. And I have to mention that a sheriff who truly would be good would not have simply stated that we had a curfew a few weeks ago, 2 hours before the case in Alameda County at least, and present fear and uncertainty between the entire community. Instead, a sheriff should be on top and acknowledge the fear and uncertainty, and really revert back to the professionals, the sociologists, the anthropologists, onto what the best impacts of securing the community. And Nicholas, I know you wanted to chime in, so feel free.
Thank you. So there's another quote by the same person who says that, you know, in order to negotiate with your oppressor must have a consciousness. I'm from South Carolina, y'all. I'm churchy. So I don't know whoever's on this call what your religious beliefs are, but there's a scripture that comes to mind that says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and spiritual wickedness. Yeah, Kwame Ture, thank you. Principalities and spiritual wickedness in high places. What this is talking about are systems and institutions, right? The systems and institutions themselves are inherently evil. They inherently do nothing, like Aidan said. They said they do nothing but serve and protect private property. We've seen that by their response to murder versus their response to looting. Their response to somebody being choked versus their response to a window on a cop car being broken or a Target being burned down. So we have to like really understand, like when we think about the quote unquote good cops, I always have a hard time understanding why this question is only brought up when we're talking about police, but this question was never brought up when this question was never brought up post 9/11 when we talked about Al-Qaeda. These questions are never brought up when we think about foreign countries and brown faces, right? These questions are only brought up when we think about the police force, because we've internalized this idea that we need them. And if you don't get anything from this call, I want you to like understand that no, not so. We don't need them. So I do want to ask the questions, and they're just reflection questions for folks to just think about when we leave this call. Like, what were you taught that police were supposed to do? Do police serve that role? Do you believe they ever will? I am a full police abolitionist. And then also on top of this, I want you to also think of, imagine a moment when you felt safe, right? And what in that moment made you feel safe? What about that moment made you feel safe and protected and cared for? I want us to think about these things and critically think about these things, because that's going to help us struggle and deal with this, the idea of good apples and, you know, the few good ones. For me personally, I stand by the belief that the only good cops that exist are the ones that find new jobs, because the institution itself serves to brutalize. I don't believe in police brutality. I believe police are brutal. So going off of these things, I want us to like, again, like think about it. What role do they serve? Police and prisons. What roles were we taught they were supposed to serve? And are they already currently serving these roles? And will they ever do that?
That was very powerful. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was just incredible. Yeah, so we are getting close to wrapping up, but I did see one last question, which is, as a person from a low-income background who is interested in the arts, do you have any advice for underrepresented minorities in traditionally white spaces like the humanities or the arts? I don't know if anyone wants to chime in for that. Go ahead, Aidan.
I want to thank whoever asked that question, because it's a really good question. And, you know, it's separate from the political, because we're dealing with aesthetic values, we're dealing with beauty when it comes to the arts. And what I would encourage any minority to do when they're in the arts is to really focus on that transformative nature that really brought you into that medium space. When I was in high school, I was in theater, so I danced, I sang, I did the whole thing. But, you know, I never really focused on the audience or the reception. I focused on the character development and the study and the learning, because I know for people of color, you have to do twice as much work in order to get the same results. And it's even more compounded if you're a woman of color. And even more compounded if you're a disabled woman of color. And so the underlying factor, I would say, is really trust your heart. And you can't have heart without art. And so you really have to trust your heart and ignore the stereotypes and the discriminatory behaviors that other people might bring to you, because really what you're doing is transforming yourself and the pain that you may be going through into love. And that's the most revolutionary act I think someone can do.
That was lovely, thank you. If no one else has anything to, oh, go ahead, Nicholas. Oh, did you? Oh no, never mind. Okay.
I was snapping for Aidan. I went to an HBCU. I cannot relate to that, but I was snapping for Aidan. That was beautiful. Yeah, that was beautiful, family.
That was a really, really lovely thought. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Catherine, for just replying right there. Just thank you all. So with that, I mean, I think we're coming to a close. I would just like to say, to wrap things up, first of all, thank you so much to all the fellow organizers who put this together. You all are amazing. I'm going to read off some names because we have quite a large group chat and I need to reference it, but this was definitely a combined effort. So Ashley, Austin, Chidi, Tegan, Anahita, Anna, Andrea, and Miriam, you all are amazing. A big part of why we were able to reach people from outside of California was because of your hard work and because you go to schools outside of California, especially Miriam. Thank you for bringing in, Miriam's an alternate from Iowa, so this is just amazing. But yeah, so just a thought to leave you all off on. The link tree's still going to be up there. The resource documents are still going to be up there. Please, please, please keep sending those emails to your legislators. We really just want to come together as a unified force and just make all of our collective voices heard. So if you didn't get to it tonight, please, prioritize some time to do it. We worked pretty hard putting together those documents, and obviously there's more information out there, but we feel like we included some pretty good pieces of information up there. And again, just thank you so much to the 4 of you speakers for doing this. You all were so incredible, and I'm so, so appreciative that you came here tonight to bless us with your wisdom and everything. And yeah, so everyone, honestly, show your appreciation to the speakers. This was incredible, and yeah, just thank you all so much.
I want to interject just vocally. I put it in the chat, but if you can at all donate any money to help compensate these speakers for the amazing work they've done just now, please Venmo Raina and she'll make sure to get the money to them.
Yeah, yeah, we definitely want to make sure the speakers get their due. So yeah, thank you so much. If there aren't any lingering things, then I think we'll end it here, but please, continue to stay active in your communities, continue to find a way to make a difference, and keep putting that pressure on your legislators, as well as just actively showing out. Like if you're able to health-wise and go to a protest, stand in solidarity. That, as we've seen, it's already made changes. So I highly encourage that. But yeah, if no one else wants to add anything, I think that brings us to a close. Thank you all so much.
Bye, everybody.
Everyone. Bye. Have a good rest of your night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course.